Whenever you think of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit actors, it's hard to imagine anyone else playing those roles. Nobody could quite capture Samwise Gamgee's love of potatoes like Sean Astin, or, Gandalf's compassionate friendship like Ian McKellen, or even Thorin Oakenshield's gold lust quite like Richard Armitage. But when we talk about the early years of the internet and all of the random fan castings that were posted on forums, I don't think any of these actors actually made the list. Instead of McKellen's Gandalf, you'd often find fan castings featuring Sean Connery or Anthony Hopkins in the role of Gandalf. For Aragorn, I clearly remember someone voting for Pierce Brosnan, which, to be completely honest, would have probably been just as awesome as Viggo's take on the character. But even though most of these fan castings were pretty wonky, there was actually one popular fan casting that came true. After The Lord of the Rings finished its run in 2003, The Hobbit wasn't exactly a sure thing, mind you. You have to remember, like every major Hollywood franchise, The Lord of the Rings was troubled with a lot of different things, Suddenly the franchise was one of the most successful in the world, and with that success came a lot of money and a lot of funny business. In 2004, Peter Jackson actually sued New Line Cinema because they fudged the numbers on the film's profits and actually withheld millions of dollars from the director. Your run-of-the-mill Hollywood accounting nonsense. And later, the Tolkien estate sued Warner Brothers over a few different issues. The first suit was similar to Jackson. They claimed that New Line and Warner Brothers withheld profits for them as well. But later, after Warner Brothers had commissioned a ton of digital merchandise, the Tolkien estate sued over not getting a chunk of that bit as well. Suffice to say, Warner Brothers has had a pretty messy relationship with the creative forces behind the Lord of the Rings films, and for a really long time, it seemed like The Hobbit would never actually get made. Now, during those dark ages, we few fans on the internet could only cling to our fan castings and fan art to imagine what a Hobbit movie would actually look like. And ultimately, a lot of fans think the films that we ended up receiving weren't worth the wait. They suffer from a lot of prequel hate, and deservedly so, but I still think that the Hobbit movies are pretty great. I don't care if Warner Brothers milked that tiny little 200-page book by transforming it into 3 gigantic movies. The set designs and the environments in Jackson's Middle-earth are so amazing that I'm just happy to sit back, relax, and immerse myself in that universe. The script itself is pretty mediocre, but we have to be honest. It's only bad if we compare it to The Lord of the Rings, and that's a pretty high bar to set. Now, in those days when we fan casted Bilbo Baggins in the Hobbit movie, there was one actor in particular who climbed to the top of the polls every single time. It wasn't Ian Holm, unfortunately, because the actor was 68 when the Lord of the Rings trilogy was initially filmed, so by the time The Hobbit was actually going to get filmed, he was a little bit too old to return as a younger Bilbo. It was at this time that fans actually cast Martin Freeman in the role. And, Freeman was most famous for the original Office sitcom from the UK and later the show Sherlock, so he had a bit of geek cred going into the fan casting. But perhaps the thing that most drove him up the polls was the fact that Jackson was rumored to favor him for the role. I clearly remember reading about that whenever the lawsuits from New Line Cinema were in the news. In the absence of the many different Tolkien-themed subreddits, I would just go to Google to get my news, and I would often type in, when is the Hobbit movie going to come out? And there were a few different results, but most of it was about the different legal litigations going on. But in between those articles, there'd be a little snippet of news about Jackson and an unexpected journey, and it wasn't uncommon to see Freeman's name pop up a time or two. Ultimately, it was Martin Freeman's performance as Bilbo Baggins that would be one of the few things that critics and fans both loved about the trilogy. And as I mentioned earlier, and as I'm sure you're aware, most folks couldn't help but feel the Hobbit movies were a lot of fluff. Each one was nearly 3 hours long, and the conflicts between the wargs, the dwarves, and the random orcs really felt like page filler instead of authentic storytelling. But every scene with Freeman's Bilbo was actually a really, really amazing thing to watch. It was just pure joy to see somebody so similar to Bilbo come onto the silver screen. I especially remember those awkward fights with Thorin Oakenshield at the very end, after he stole the Arkenstone. Alright guys, what do you think? Do you wish somebody else was cast as Bilbo?